You know, when you think of an asylum, you probably picture padded cells, locked doors, something from a bygone era. But what if it never really went away? In this explainer, we're going to trace the really unsettling history of the asylum, from its physical walls back in the Victorian age to a modern, invisible version that might just be all around us.
And that leads us to the big, provocative question we're really digging into here. What if the asylum isn't a relic of the past? What if it just changed its form? To even begin to understand that, we have to go way back to the 19th century to see what the asylum was really for in the first place. So, we tend to think of asylums as medical institutions, right? Places for healing. But their main job was often something else entirely. They became these tools for social management. Basically a convenient place to put anyone who didn't quite fit the very rigid molds of Victorian society. And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. Take the real story of a guy named E.B. Fleming. Back in 1893, he was involuntarily committed to an asylum in Texas, not for some severe psychosis, but for melancholia, because he was having financial problems. He called it exactly what it was, a complete violation of his freedom.
In this violation of liberty, it was enforced through a process literally designed to break a person down. When new patients came in, they were systematically stripped of their own identity. Their hair was shaved, their clothes were taken, their name was replaced. It was all about creating conformity through humiliation.
But here is where it gets really interesting. The official story, the PR campaign if you will, was the exact opposite. The whole system was sold to the public as a form of moral treatment. In this contradiction, it was baked right into the DNA of the system. On one hand, you had this thing called the Kirkbride clan, which promised healing through beautiful buildings and peaceful landscapes. But then, there was the reality for the people inside. For instance, in one New York asylum, patients published a journal called The Opal. Sounds great, right? Except every single thing they wrote was heavily censored by the staff.
So this was never about free expression. It was about performing sanity. The patients knew they were being watched, constantly, and they knew their ticket out depended on saying and doing the right things. They had the illusion of a voice, but it wasn't a real one.
Okay, let's fast forward to the 20th century and see how this idea builds into something even more sinister. Because now, the asylum's tools of control are about to be explicitly weaponized by the state.
This is a truly chilling turning point. In 1959, the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, he basically made political dissent a medical diagnosis. If you disagreed with the state, you weren't a political opponent. You were mentally ill, and you needed to be treated. Now, to make that work, they needed some new diagnoses. Sluggish schizophrenia was one of the most infamous ones. It was a completely made-up condition, designed specifically to lock up critics who showed zero outward signs of mental illness. Get this, their very sanity was treated as a symptom of their supposed disease.
And if you think that's wild, it gets even more absurd with diagnoses like philosophical intoxication. This was for people whose only symptom was, well, thinking too much about things that went against the Communist Party. It was literally a thought crime turned into a medical condition and punished with being locked up indefinitely.
And please don't think this is just ancient history. This exact model of using psychiatry as a weapon is alive and well. In China's Ankang System today, people who don't conform to the ideology, like Falun Gong practitioners, are treated as having a dangerous pathology that has to be cured through institutionalization. And all of this history brings us right up to today, to a place where many critics argue the asylum hasn't vanished at all. Instead, it's just evolved into its final, most powerful form, the digital asylum.
So after the global pandemic, you had the World Economic Forum launching its Great Reset initiative. This was a proposal to rebuild the global economy by deeply weaving together our digital, physical, and even our biological lives. And critics immediately pointed to this as a potential blueprint for a new kind of top-down social management.
And according to this theory, these are the pillars holding it up. Biometric surveillance to monitor our bodies, digital IDs to track our every move and control our access, and ESG scores, that's environmental, social, and governance, to measure how well we comply with a set of approved behaviors.
Now, the logic here, critics say, is just eerily similar to the asylums of the past. Just like the Victorian asylum managed social outcasts, and the Soviet system cured dissenters, this new system redefines what an individual is. You're no longer just a citizen. You become a subject to be monitored, measured, and managed for the so-called collective good of a new normative order, an order defined by things like public health and sustainability metrics.
But you might be asking, how could this even happen? Well, there's a theory called mass formation that suggests that when a society is just soaked in anxiety and people feel really disconnected from each other, they become vulnerable to a kind of collective groupthink. They start craving a simple story and become willing to hand over their freedom to experts who promise them safety.
And this, really, is the ultimate warning that history gives us. From Victorian moral treatment to Soviet punitive psychiatry, the pattern is exactly the same. When the state starts using health and safety as its main reason for control, the asylum's walls just dissolve. They expand to cover all of society.
Which brings us right back to that question from the beginning, but now it has all this historical weight behind it. So what do you think? Are we really free? Or are we living inside a new kind of asylum? One with invisible walls that stretch across the entire globe? I genuinely love to know what you think about all this. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And hey, if you found this breakdown valuable, please do me a favor and hit like and subscribe for more.